Test 1, 2. Testing, testing. Hey, test 1, 2. If you guys can hear me speak, can someone post in the chat? Hey, there we go. Are you seeing video as well? It's YouTube streaming isn't giving me a thumbnail, so I can just monitor what's happening in OBS right now. Okay, great. Yeah, as long as it's a still image here, I can switch over to my video real quick. Hey everyone, we're gonna give this a few minutes to let some people trickle in. But welcome to the stream. Awesome. And you've got my Pro Tools session with me in the picture-in-picture as well. I close my window so we're not hearing the street on the microphone. Hey, Sonny. And hey, Will. I forget if I said hey to you, too. Great to have you all here. We're just going to give this a couple more minutes, really get going at 6:05. Let some more people trickle in. But if you guys have any questions that you're going to want me to answer during this, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm going to do my best to keep my eye on the chat the whole time. Just bear with me. This is my first time streaming, so it's going to be an experience for all of us. Hey, Rob. Nice to have you with us. If I had a second camera, I could show you the patch that's going right now, playing this music in the background, but unfortunately I only have this one. Oh, I took that reverb out too quickly. But it is 6:05. Hello, everyone. I'm Josh. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a theatrical sound designer, and I'm here to talk about using iZotope RX. We're going to cover a couple different things. We're going to cover some repair techniques. We're going to cover creative techniques, and we're going to cover some little tips and tricks that are going to help you to get out of tight corners when trying to fix audio. So, for those of you who don't know, iZotope RX is a spectral audio editor. It's made by the company iZotope. It has been around for a long time. The version that we're going to be working in today is iZotope RX 7 Advanced. iZotope makes a couple different versions of RX. They make the advanced version, which has all the bells and whistles. They make the standard version, which has some of the bells and whistles. It has a standalone audio editor and a lot of the basic plugins. And then they also make RX Elements and Plugin Pack, which just have the some of the basic plugins for you to use in your DAW. So let's go over to our workspace. I just have a basic Pro Tools session set up right now. iZotope runs as a standalone audio editor. You can see down here, if I open it up, it will open as its own application, and I can bring in, sorry about that. This is what it looks like when you boot it up. You can drag and drop a file in, or you can open a file through a browser. The way that I primarily like to work with RX is alongside another DAW. And the reason I'm using Pro Tools is because Pro Tools has this great little app in the audio suite called RX Connect. If I go to iZotope, which I can never find because it is at the bottom and not in the middle, even though it starts with an I, and I open my RX7 Connect audio suite plugin, I get this right here. For those of you who aren't familiar with Pro Tools, Audio Suite is their non-real-time destructive plugin option. So in Pro Tools, I can open a plugin here in Inserts traditionally. So let's say I were to open the RX7 Spectral Denoise. I can have that here just as a normal plugin in Pro Tools, and as I run, it'll do its denoising. Audio Suite, I can open this in Audio Suite as well, and that would allow me to highlight a clip and run that process just on that clip, and it would bake it in, so that way I don't have to worry about, say, having a clip with noise earlier in a track and then a clip without noise later in the track, and having to disable the plugin and automate it. I can just do the operation that I need to on a single clip. The great thing about this RX7 Connect option is if I have a piece of audio that needs multiple passes of something, I can send it out to RX7 and I can do all of those passes in RX standalone and then send it back to Pro Tools. It also allows me to take advantage of the spectral editor properties of RX, which we'll get into in a second, which is a slightly more advanced way of looking at audio than you get in a standard DAW. So real quick, I'm just going to go over what we're looking at in this Pro Tools session here. I also have a Keycaster on, so if I play something, you'll see over in the corner what my key is. And let me make that a little bit longer. I think that was probably sitting there for too short. And feel free to, if I'm going a little too fast, throw me a question or tell me to slow down in the chat if I need to go back over something. This is also recording into YouTube, hopefully, so it should be here when we're done. Great, so to go over this Pro Tools session, I've got these two tracks here, stereo singles, mono singles. I've got a working mono track, a working stereo track, just a master fader with an instance of Insight, which is going to show us some of our metering options. And let me actually unmute that. So we're getting some visual readout here of the audio that we're hearing out of Pro Tools.
We lost it.
And I've also got a nice limiter here just to make sure I don't blow anyone's ears out or my own ears out if I play something that's a little bit louder, like this clip over here, which I've also gained down because it was too loud earlier. Great. So the first thing I want to say about working with RX, and this is also a good tip for working with any type of audio suite or destructive plugin in general, is make sure that you have your original audio somewhere. That's why I have these two sets of tracks, these stereo and mono singles, and then the working mono and the working stereo track. So that way I can always go back and A/B the work that I've done that's destructive against the original file to make sure that I haven't gone too far. One of the things I do want to warn about using RX is you can very easily go too far and end up hurting your audio more than you're helping it. It's not uncommon for me to send a clip out to RX, spend a lot of time denoising and taking out other background sounds, doing some really tweaky spectral audio editing, and then coming back and realizing that I've now made something that doesn't fit within my mix at all. So I've got a variety of content here. I've got some dialogue, I've got some effects, I've got some field recordings, I've got also some music and some multi-tracked dialogue from a podcast, which we're going to look at a little bit later. But I think the first thing we'll look at is just doing a little bit of basic denoise, de-reverb, and spectral repair on a clip that is fairly well recorded, but in a less than ideal room. So I'm going to pull a copy of my clip down here into my working mono, again, so that way we don't hurt the original clip, we're just working on this copy. So let's take a listen to what we have here, and just tell me in the chat if this level feels okay for you. I'm monitoring separately from the stream, so I don't have to deal with several seconds of latency on my voice.
I dance to the left, I dance to the right, and down the center too. I have had dogs and cats, different shapes, sizes, and colors. They get along most of the time, like a beautiful rainbow.
And now back to the program with Pierre.
I dance to the
So,
left.
as we hear in this clip, we've got a little bit of reverb from the room that we were recording in. We've got a little bit of tone from the room that we were recording in. And then we hear a little bit of motion. We hear some steps in here. We hear some plosives over here. There's also, if we listen closely, a little bit of clipping.
And now back to the program with Pierre.
So that's a couple things that we're going to attack in this clip. We could try and solve some of this with EQ and compression and some fancy editing in Pro Tools, but this is an iZotope RX class, so let's send it to RX. How do we do that? First thing we want to do, select our clip, come over to our Audio Suite plugin that we opened before, and we see I've got these two options here. I've got reference and I've got repair. So if I hover, it'll tell me repair, use the mode to directly edit audio clips in RX, then render the changes in Pro Tools. And reference, it'll tell me this mode is to send a copy of the audio clips to RX for reference and learning features. We're going to look at the reference mode a little bit later. Primarily what we're going to be using is the repair mode. So I'm going to send this over to RX, and I just hit that send button. So here's the clip that we were just looking at in Pro Tools. We see a couple things. The first thing we see is that we've got our standard waveform here in blue. And if I default that, we see it a little bit clearer. And then behind it, we see this orange to dark blue, actually to orange to black gradient. So what are we looking at? So blue, this part, is our waveform. It's a waveform like we're used to looking at in any DAW. We can select an area of it, and we can zoom in to the level of the sample. And we see every one of these little handles here, which I can even drag. if I want to, but I'm going to undo that because we don't. That is every sample that's being taken. This session and all the stuff we're going to look at right now is in 48K, and I mostly did that because I wasn't sure how well a 96K session was going to work with streaming. I highly recommend, if you have content that you intend on using iZotope RX with, that you work at a higher sample rate. 96K is definitely going to help you get a lot more detail and a lot less artifacts out of a lot of the processes that we're going to look at. But for today, we're just in a standard 48K. So that's our standard waveform view. We're actually not going to spend too much time in that today. Most of what we're going to look at here is our spectral view. So what do we have in our spectral view? We have time across the x-axis, pretty standard. We have frequency across the y-axis, so this is a little bit different than we're used to looking at in a waveform. We've got 20K and above all the way up here. We've got 100 hertz and down all the way down here. This is not the type of scaling that we're used to seeing in, say, an equalization plugin, and that's because when you're working with audio repair, a lot of the detail work that you end up doing to solve problems actually happens to be in this 1K and above area of the spectrum, as opposed to being 1K and down, though we certainly do operations down here. And if I knew I had an operation that I needed to work in this 1K and down area, and I didn't have as much detail as I wanted, we have this handy frequency scale zoom over here. A little bit goes a long way, and then I can grab this, and can I scroll this? No, that'll just do, scrolling just does zoom, but I can scroll that down to a frequency I want, so now we see we are actually in 0 to 1.2K window here in terms of frequency. Great, so that's our x-axis and our y-axis. So now, why is it orange and blue? Well, because we've used our y-axis for frequency as opposed to using our y-axis for intensity the way that we would in a traditional DAW, we're using color for intensity. So if we look over here at this color scale of dB, it shows us that each of these colors actually relates to level. So white would be 0 dB full scale, so that would be a clipped signal. Black is basically nothing, and we actually see that over on the sides. We have this empty air here. Why do we have this empty air? Well, if we go back to Pro Tools, and we look at our Audio Suite plugin, we see that there is 2.0 in this little window. What that means in Pro Tools Audio Suite world is that it is giving us handles in this audio file that extend beyond the actual clip. So that way, if I were to do an Audio Suite motion on a clip and say this was a smaller chunk of a larger audio file, and after I did that Audio Suite, I said, oh, I want to make an edit and pull this out, I will have content over here because Audio Suite builds you a new clip. It's very handy in a lot of work we do, but for today, it's not going to be useful for any of the work we do since we're working with whole clips. So I'm actually going to change that to 0. I'm going to come back to RX, get rid of this audio that we sent over, come back to Pro Tools, and hit send. So now we're back at RX, and we see we don't have any of that blank area to the left and right of our clip. Great, so now that we've gone over to RX, first thing we're going to do, of course, play the clip again. Oh, and I can't hear the clip. So let's see what changed.
I dance to the left, I dance to the right,
There we
and down
go.
the center too. I have had dogs and cats, different shapes, sizes, and colors. They get along most of the time, like a beautiful rainbow.
And now back to the program with Pierre.
All right, so we just played our file, and I'm just going to go over a couple of the repair things that we're going to want to tackle here. first thing we see down here is we've got this consistent tone down around 100 hertz that's sitting under one of the voices. Now, we could easily attack this tone with an EQ plugin, and that's certainly a possibility. So I'm going to open up EQ and default it. Actually, let me step back for a second, because I feel like we haven't talked about the interface. We talked about this middle area. We haven't talked about the external areas. So let's do that first. So we've got our audio here. Below, we've
Dance to the
got
left, I dance to the right.
this nice high-resolution meter. And we've got some info about the file. It's telling us that it is a 32-bit float. Anytime you bring something into RX, it is automatically going to become 32-bit float, so that way it can do more detailed work than you can get in 24-bit. It's telling us that we are at 48 kilohertz on this file. Over on the left, we've got a counter. This can be set to a couple different options. It can be in samples, time code. It can also play the source time and source time code. So if I'm working on a post-production project over in Pro Tools and I want to make sure that I'm looking at the original time code the clip came with, this would be what I'd use. For now, we're just going to stay in time. I've got channel order. It's mono, so that doesn't really affect us. And I've got some zoom options there, which we'll look at later. Also, we've got our transport controls. These should look pretty familiar to you. There's headphone monitoring and record. If you can use iZotope RX as a stereo recording software. I've never done it. I'm sure people do. But we're not going to talk about that today. We've got our standard go back to the beginning, which if I click will send our playhead back to the beginning. We've got standard play.
I dance to the left, I dance to the right.
And then we've got this play frequency selection. So this is really interesting. One of the powerful parts of iZotope RX is being able to dig into specific points in the frequency spectrum and adjust them, but also monitor them, which is going to make it really handy when we come to working on a lot of our files. So if I hit this right now,
I dance to the left.
I have nothing selected. So it's just going to play normally. But if I hit F and change my time selection, which is our little vertical little caret pointer thing, to a horizontal caret pointer thing, now I don't select side to side, I select up and down. And I'm just selecting a specific part of the frequency range. So if I come here and I hit play frequency selection,
I dance to the left, I dance to
we
the right.
hear a
And
band
down the
limited
center, too.
signal.
I have
And
dogs
what's
and
great
cats.
about this is
Different
while it's
shapes,
playing,
sizes, and
I can
colors.
click,
They get along most of the time.
I can
Like a
drag,
beautiful rainbow.
and we hear our band's limited selection is acting as a filter. So that is really going to be helpful when we start to hunt and peck for specific frequencies and specific moments that we want to make adjustments on. I made that switch. T is time, F is frequency. They're also down here in our little toolkit area. We see right here is our time selector, right here is our frequency selector, and then we have this section in the middle, the time frequency selection tool, which is R. You can't really type TF as a useful key command, so I guess they chose R because it is right there in a little triangle with T and F. And what that does is it allows us to just grab a window somewhere here, and we've now combined our time and our frequency selection, which again is going to be super helpful when we start looking for small repair areas. We also have a lasso selection, which is what it sounds like. Same thing that you'd see in, say, Vectorworks or AutoCAD. You can draw a little squiggle, and whatever's in there will select. Lasso you can get to with L as well. Brush, which you get to with B, is this one, and that just gives us a little brush like we'd have in, say, Photoshop. And that's not a super useful thing, but the way I'd actually use that is, say, if I want to grab just this frequency here, which is a little piece of speech. And we see that when I clicked again, this other selection went away. So if we want to add to our selection, anytime we can hold shift. And now I can make a selection that's this whole vowel sound right there. And if I hit play, we hear that we're just listening to this little selection. There's a magic brush tool as well, which is what it sounds like. It is similar to the magic brush in Photoshop. I don't use this tool too much. I usually find that using the normal brush is a lot better, but we see with a fairly clean piece of audio like this, it's actually doing a fairly good job of selecting all of the harmonics of the voice. And let's say I selected one that I don't like. We talked about how shift click will add to your selection. Well, option click will detract from your selection. And that way you don't have to go and redraw the entire selection if you've grabbed something that you didn't want to. We also have over here this and I have to brush something. So I'm going to brush this one again. And I'm just going to come around and grab that. We see that this thing popped up, and this is select harmonics. And if I do that, it shows me right now that I'm only in the first harmonic, but if I hit all, it's going to select up to 10 harmonics above that frequency selection that I made. Harmonic selection is not super complicated math for a program like this, but it is still a selection that we don't have in a standard DAW like Pro Tools or Logic or Ableton. I can also just click specific harmonics that I want to grab. Let's say I actually didn't want my first harmonic, but I wanted the harmonics above it, or I just wanted the odd harmonics. I can make those selections, and then if I play, we're hearing our harmonic selection. So those are our selection tools. Over here, zoom, pretty self-explanatory. Zoom versus grab and drag tool. Grab and drag isn't doing too much now, but if I zoom in and then I grab and drag, I can now scrub along our timeline. Zoom, if I click that, well, if I actually click it and don't miss it, same deal. I'm zooming in on a specific area, and I'm just option clicking there with the zoom tool to zoom out. Most of the time we're going to stay in our time, our frequency and our time frequency window tools, and you'll see me switching back and forth over here on Keycaster. Let me know if that Keycaster is moving a little bit too fast, or if you need me to go over where any commands that I hit with a key is in the larger window. Last thing over here, we're going to talk about instant process later, so I didn't forget about it. But the last thing we're going to talk about over here is view clip gain. We see we've got a line here. That line is a clip gain line. Same kind of clip gain line that you'd see in any other program. And we see that as I make keyframes in that clip gain line and drag them, we see the intensity increase or decrease. This is really helpful if you're just trying to gain around one specific word, one specific note, anything like that. But for now, I'm going to undo all that, clear out my clip gain line, and I'm going to turn it off because I find that if I leave it on, I end up clicking on it by accident and adjusting gain where I don't want to. So that's our bottom bar. We also have a zoom here. That's a horizontal zoom. That can also be done with the mouse wheel. You're going to see me use the mouse wheel far more than you see me use this. And over here, we've got some info about our selected areas. It's just timecode info within the clip. We can also see if I were to do, say, a frequency selection, it'll tell me where my low point, high point, and the range of my frequency selection. And if I'm in a time frequency, it does the same thing. I can also see where my cursor is over here, both in terms of time and frequency, which is super handy. Great. So that's the bottom bar. Let's come over to the right bar. The right bar is where all of our modules live. Modules are the heart and soul of RX. You've probably heard of their spectral denoise, their voice denoise, their dialogue isolate modules. Many of these are available within your DAW. If you have iZotope RX as a standalone, it'll install these as plugins. I generally find that I like to use them in the standalone as opposed to just using them in the plugin unless I know, say for example, that I'm doing a denoising operation on a fairly steady noise floor within my DAW. Otherwise, I prefer to come over to here, and we'll talk about why in a second. So repair modules. Below that, we have utility modules. These are, some of these are going to be a little bit more familiar to you, and some of these are not. We have an EQ module, the same way that we'd have in a DAW. We have a loudness module. This is talking about loudness metering, and it is doing true peak limiting and integrated loudness adjustments. We have a gain module. It's just gain, just what it sounds like. I almost never use this since there is the clip gain line, and the clip gain line won't show up in our history. It's something that we can adjust whenever we want. We don't have to do any undos, which we'll talk about in a second. We also have, there's a couple others here, which we'll talk about in a bit. We've also got this super handy plugin. What does the plugin do? The plugin allows me to grab any plugin that I want and use it as a module in iZotope RX. This comes in handy a lot if you want to do some really creative frequency-based effect work. It also comes in handy, say, if you have another EQ that you prefer over the built-in iZotope RX EQ, such as the FabFilter EQ. But I can grab anything I want. If I want to grab my Soundtoys Echo Boy Jr., it is now a module within RX. So I'm just going to leave that empty for now, and we'll come back to that later. Those are some of our utility plugins. There's a fade, there's EQ match, which we'll talk about later. Dither, azimuth, some more specific mastering and file repair type things. We have time and pitch adjustments, which are a pretty nice algorithm that RX has. Then down here we've got our last batch of modules, which are our measurement modules. There's markers. Markers are great. I love using markers when I do a first pass of a piece of audio. If
I dance
play
to the
it,
left, I dance to the right, and down the center too. I have had dogs and cats.
And I hit M,
different shapes,
it's
sizes,
gonna
and
drop a
colors.
marker.
They get along most of the time, like a beautiful rainbow.
And now back to the program with Pierre.
And so I was able to just drop a few markers in some places I know we're going to want to come back to later and make some adjustments. The markers window here is pretty straightforward. I've got the name of the marker. I can select markers if I want to do an operation on them. I can set the playhead to that marker with this little yellow button. I can play from that
Like
marker.
a beautiful rainbow.
If I hit this little playhead button, I can name the marker. Let's call that Rainbow, because that's what she's saying there. And we see it renames up at the top. You can also do marker selections. So if I just make that 5, we now have a marked region. And I can expand that region and collapse it, and we see that it shows up there. I can make a comment if I want to, and that'll just show up in this marker window. Markers can be exported and imported. I also haven't tried this, but I believe they can be baked into the file, and a program like QLab will then use those to create slices. I have iZotope RX set as my audio editing program from QLab, and I do use it to make quick adjustments on files that I have in there while I'm working. So for now, we're going to close our marker window. And we've talked about modules. We've talked about the bottom bar. Top bar is pretty self-explanatory. You can have multiple audio files open, and they will tab this way. we'll also see this send back when we are done making our adjustments. We're going to send it back to Pro Tools, and that's how we're going to render down our file with Audio Suite. One last thing I want to mention, we do have this little Repair Assistant button up here in the top corner. And if I click that, it opens this nice little thing, and it's going to say, what type of material would you like to clean up? Dialogue, music, other. And if I hit Start Analysis, it's going to go through and look at the whole file, and it's going to give me some suggestions for how to fix it. And I can play
Sizes
the
and
original.
colors. They get along.
I can play, it's going to give me 3 options here.
Sizes and colors.
Play that. I can play this
Sizes
one.
and colors. Sizes.
This one. And then if I want, I can click here and see the module chain that it's suggesting. Oh, there we go. Open as module chain. And it's just doing mouth declick and declick. I actually don't want to use that. I have some other thoughts about what needs to happen to this file. But if you find your place in a situation where you're scratching your head trying to figure out which modules need to be used to fix this, the Repair Assistant is not a bad tool. That being said, I think we can probably do a little bit better than this AI is doing for us. So, first thing I want to do here is I want to do a little bit of denoising. You can see noise pretty easily in RX. All of this sort of shaded area in between, and we see it speckled up here in the high frequencies, is our noise. If there was no noise, it would be black. If it was a more solid noise floor, it would be a little bit more of a solid color. But if we play from the beginning.
I dance to the left, I dance to the right, and down the center too. I have had dogs and cats. Different shapes, sizes, and colors. They get along most of the time. Like a beautiful rainbow.
We hear it's not actually too noisy. But let's say that I do want to do a denoise pass on this. I would open up my spectral denoise. I'm going to select the whole thing, and I'm going to do this first in adaptive mode. One thing I do want to point out is that all of the modules in RX are going to remember the last state that you had them in. One thing I like to do if I'm going at a module for a new session is just open up this preset window here and click default. It'll default your module so you can start fresh, or if you have some presets that you like, it comes with a couple, and you can see I've made 1 or 2 that I've used in past projects on pieces of audio that I know I'm going to do the same noise reduction to. You can do that. We have a couple options here in spectral denoise. The main 2 you want to look at are these learn and adaptive mode. Learn is great if you've got a steady, clean clip of noise that you can teach this. You can teach this module what the noise profile is going to be. Adaptive is going to be better for something like this where the noise might be changing, or I don't necessarily have a clean place to grab a noise profile from. We're going to go into adaptive mode. I'm going to turn up my quality. Again, this is going to be a destructive process, so I always tend to lean towards C and D, which are the best quality, as opposed to fast quality. I'm going to leave the rest of these the same, and I'm going to now preview my audio.
I dance to the left, I dance to the right, and down the center too. I have had dogs and cats. Different shapes, sizes, and colors. They get along most of the time. Like a beautiful rainbow.
And
So, as you saw as I was going through there, I was just adjusting our threshold and reduction a little bit. And if we saw as I did that, our curves here moved. We have 2 curves here. We've got our noise profile, our residual noise, and then this darker gray is our input signal. The white is our output signal. So if I preview that again.
I dance to the left, I dance to the right, and down the center too. I have had dogs and cats.
We can see it moving around, and it changes color when it dips below that noise profile. we have frequency on our x-axis, and we have level on our y-axis. There are also some advanced settings down here. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in a future clip that we're going to look at. But one thing I do want to point out is if you're not sure if your denoiser is really doing much, there's this handy little button called output noise only, and instead of listening to the fixed signal, you can listen to what's getting rid of. So let's hit preview again. And actually what we're hearing here is we're not really reducing that much noise. Instead, what this module is doing is it's catching a lot of the breaths in between. So that means that spectral denoise is probably not the right module for this operation. So I'm going to get rid of it. And instead, we're going to come here and we're going to grab our debreathe module, breath control module. It's not debreathe, it's breath control. And let's run a preview here.
I dance to the left, I dance to the right, and down the center too. I have had dogs and cats. Different shapes, sizes, and colors. They get along most of the time. Like a beautiful rainbow.
And now
There we
back
go.
to the program with Pierre.
So we saw the first couple breaths we passed, nothing was really happening. And then when I dropped this target level here, we started to see some breaths come through. So let's come back to somewhere where we know there's a breath, and I'm going to do output breaths only so we hear that the module is properly catching these breaths. And so in a perfect world, we want to find a threshold where we are debreathing, but we are not affecting the actual voice of our speaker. So I'm going to select our whole selection. And now that we've previewed it and we liked what we heard, I'm going to render it. Uh-oh, what happened? Now we're left with just breaths. And we've gotten rid of all of our audio. And we actually caught a little bit of a T here, so we'll want to fix that. Why did that happen? Well, it happened because we have output breaths only. So I'm going to undo with Command-Z. I'm going to just raise my threshold a little bit there, and I'm going to render again. And now we saw that those areas decreased in color, and I'm just going to, one more time so you can see what's happening. Just watch this breath here. While I come and hit render, we saw that it got a little bit darker, which means that we've reduced that level. So I'm going to play it again.
I dance to the left, I dance to the right, and down the center too.
Well, so maybe we did need a higher sensitivity. One thing I find a lot is doing whole file operations with some of these intelligent plugins like breath control is probably not the best. Breaths are going to happen at different levels across the file, so I actually like to take a more targeted approach and just do a time selection here. Let's listen. And now we hear, it's a little bit annoying to listen to it like that, but we hear that we've actually caught that breath pretty well. So I'm going to render that breath out, and now when I come back to the beginning,
I dance to the left, I dance to the right, and down the center too.
We've significantly decreased that breath. For time's sake, I'm just going to do a full selection. I'm going to render at that level and get rid of some of those breaths.
I dance to the left, I dance to the right, and down the center too. I have had dogs and cats.
But of course, now what we're hearing is that we got a little too aggressive on cutting off the tail of some of our talking. So we're actually going to undo that. So that's the breath control. We're going to look at that again in another clip. But I thought this was a good place to start introducing us to the idea of deciding on modules. A lot of modules can attack the same issue, and we want to make sure that we're using the best module for the job. So, let's listen to this quick right here.
And
We heard someone
Rainbow.
decided to take a step in the gap between are 2 speakers. Now, we could just delete this, and that's certainly an option. If I highlight it and I hit delete, it's just going to subtract it from the clip.
Rainbow.
And now,
And we heard a little bit of residual there,
Bow.
but it's now gone. The problem with just deleting that time selection is that if this was something that happened to be in sync with video or with another audio file, we've now lost our sync. And when we render this back to Pro Tools, it's going to be a shorter file. And that's not something that we want to do. So how can we approach this? Well, time selection and delete didn't do it, but we've got a lot of other tools in our arsenal. So let's find this whole area that we want to fix. And there's a couple things going on there. There's a little bit of a mouth click, there's a step, and then there's the reverberation of that step. If we grab our spectral repair tool, we're going to tackle it this way. The spectral repair module is one of, if not the most powerful modules in RX. And it's really the thing, knowing how to use this module is the thing that'll bring you from a plug-in hunt and peck fixer to a real powerful RX user. So what do we have in this module? Well, we've got a couple things. We've got 4 tabs across the top. We've got attenuate, replace, pattern, partials, and noise. We're going to start on attenuate because attenuate is the most common part of this module that I use. We got a couple options here. We have multi-resolution as a checkbox, and we have bands. We have surrounding region length, strength, before and after weighting, and direction of interpolation. So if I run this as is and I hit render, we see that a lot of that sound in there has just gone away. And if we play it,
Bow.
and now back.
we heard it. It just disappeared. Wasn't perfect. We interrupted the noise floor and there was a noticeable dropout. So we're going to get more detailed with this. But what I want to point out is that this plugin is not just doing gain adjustments. It is making decisions on whether or not the area that you have selected is similar or dissimilar from the area around it. So what that means is I want to get rid of this sound here, which is errant, and I want it to be more similar to the sound around it, which is just our noise floor. I did the time selection tool, but that's actually this is actually a pretty broad selection. I'm going to do the brush selection tool, and I just hit B to pull that up. And I'm going to come here, and I'm going to draw this noise out. And I'm going to come back here, make sure I've got it all the way, and I've got this little bit down here. I'm going to add this little bit there, and I'm also going to add this bit here. These are actually 2 separate noises, but for what we're doing right now, that's okay. I'm going to grab this here too. Great. So we've got 4 selection areas. If we listen to them with our frequency selection, we hear that we've got both that step and we've got that little mouth click. So what do we want to do? Well, the first thing we want to do is decide, do we want this to be more similar to the sound that was coming before or after the selection we've made? Right now we're in horizontal mode, so what that means is that it's making the selection based off of time. So, because these are some sharp sounds that probably have a little bit of a tail going this way, we want to go before, from when there was no noise. So we're going to weight this before, and we're not going to go all the way. We're going to go about halfway here. We can go all the way up to 1, both directions. We're going to go to 0.5. We're going to figure out our surrounding region. If you watch the selection as I move this, and we see that this little dotted bracket here just expanded with that selection. What that means is that is the window that it's going to look in to find out how similar or dissimilar the sound we're trying to adjust is. Now we're going to look back at this bands window. Band is 512. I'm going to turn multi-resolution back on. If I bring it up to 2048, we see that we've expanded that surrounding region by a significant amount. The bands thing is something you just sort of want to play with. I tend to leave it around 1024 or 2048. But if you're having trouble with a specific piece of audio, you can play around with it. And then strength is just what it sounds like. So we're going to leave strength. We're going to actually put it up to 1.5 because we're pretty confident that we want to get rid of these. And I'm just going to hit render. And now we see that all of those dark lines that were just there, so we come back and we see those sort of darker lines. When I render, they've gone away. I'm going to grab my time tool and we're going to listen to that now.
Bow.
And now back to the program.
So now that we took a much more targeted approach, you can hear that it's a much cleaner reduction than what we had when we just did a frequency selection of that area. One of the things I want to impress on you is that iZotope RX is going to work better when it is more targeted at the fix that you're going for. The broader the operation you're trying to do, the less chance that you're going to get a really discrete fix. And this tool is really about doing discrete little fixes that you can't get to with a standard DAW. So, now that we've gotten rid of that, let's find some of the other areas we want to get rid of some stuff. And we had some steps here. I'm actually just gonna do that as a time selection, and let's listen.
Pierre.
Actually worked pretty well, but we heard that there was some residuals. So let's grab our time frequency selection, just do that. And now that we've grabbed a small chunk of frequency, we're going to try our vertical tool. And what that's going to do is it's going to take its before and after weighting based on frequency and not based on time. We did a time-based spectral repair earlier, and what we found was that it worked fine in these sort of more high mid-range frequencies, but these higher frequencies, because it saw that there was sound up here, it didn't attenuate them nearly as much. So we're going to before weight. I'm actually going to turn up the bands all the way because we're in a higher part of the frequency spectrum, and I'm going to render that down. And now we see that we've really gotten rid of that.
Pierre.
And we actually probably went too far, and that's a little unnatural. So I'm going to reduce my strength to, say, 0.8. I'm going to render that again. And now...
With Pierre.
It's a little bit better. We've still got these areas here. I'm going to try getting rid of those this way.
Pierre.
That's okay. We're not going to worry too much about this right now. I just wanted to show you the difference between the vertical and horizontal weighting in the attenuate function. So the last thing I want to look at in this clip is going to be our de-reverb. This plugin is pretty impressive, and it's something that you can't really do outside of one of these specialty spectral audio repair. So if we listen...
I dance to the left, I dance to the right, and down the center too.
We hear that there's a not insignificant reverb tail on here, but it's also pretty clean. So let's try and get rid of that and clean up this dialogue. I'm going to open my de-reverb. I'm going to default it. And we see that this has a learn button. So let's just preview at its standard setting and see what happens.
I dance to the left, I dance to the right, and down the center too. I have had dogs and cats.
Well, its standard settings are a little bit harsh, and we heard it really cutting off the tail of the natural voice. And that's not what we want to do. We just want to attenuate down some of our reverb. So what we want to do is we want to give it a profile for what that reverb sounds like. So let's find an area where the whole reverb tail gets to ring out.
They get along most of the time. Like a
That one's pretty good. If we hear, it ends about here.
They get along most of the time.
And then we go into a breath, and we can even see if we zoom in, we see that little reverb tail here, we hear the breath, and then we're out. So I'm going to make this whole selection right up until the next transient, and I'm going to ask it to learn. So what did it do? It changed our reverb profile. What does that mean? Well, in reverb profile, we've got 4 bands: low, low mid, high, and they can be adjusted based on where the reverb sits in the frequency spectrum. It also has tail length, so it's learning from this how long the reverb tail is. That all is pretty straightforward. You can go through and tweak these if you want. Hold on, let me relearn that because I forgot where that was, so we're pretty close. But the learn is usually pretty good, and then it just takes a little bit of tweaking. We've got a reduction, which is the overall strength of this processing, which we're certainly going to play with because I'm guessing that 10 is going to be too high. Artifact smoothing, and this thing called enhanced dry signal. So let's preview this with the profile that it gave us, and I'm going to preview across the entire file.
dogs and cats. Different shapes, sizes, and colors. They get along most of the time. Like a beautiful rainbow.
And now back.
Dogs and cats. Different shapes, sizes, and colors. They get along most of the time. Like a beautiful rainbow.
So as we heard, 10 was a little harsh, and we really heard that in the voice. But when we dropped it down to 7, it was a lot better. So we're going to preview from the beginning.
I dance to the left, I dance to the right, and down the center too. I have had dogs and cats. Different shapes, sizes, and colors. They get along most of the time. Like
So if you heard when I switched to output reverb only, we were catching some of the voice, and we were actually catching it differently between her voice and his voice. So that's a good indication that we're probably going to want 2 different reverb profiles for the 2 of them. So I'm going to select just our first voice, which we have a profile for already. I've dropped the reduction down a little bit. I find that the level that you need to be at to do a full reverb reduction will almost always harm the original audio file. So really, I'm using this tool just a little bit to bring down the reverb so it's not as noticeable, as opposed to really deliberately getting rid of all of it. So I'm going to make sure output reverb only is turned off. Otherwise, I will just render a bunch of reverb tails. And I'm going to... Let's just try this enhanced dry signal. That helps sometimes. I'm going to hit render. We saw a lot of tails disappear, especially up in the high frequencies. And now we're going to listen.
I dance to the left, I dance to the right, and down the center too. I have had dogs and cats. Different shapes, sizes, and colors. They get along most of the time. Like a beautiful rainbow.
And we see we had a pretty significant reduction there. But we were getting some artifacts, and those are really coming from those higher frequency areas where we see they've gone from sort of a darker blue to a black. So one of the things we can do is we can reduce those highs in the reverb profile. The other thing we can do is, instead of making a time selection, we can make a time frequency selection, and we can render independently. So if we do a render there, and then let's do another render, let me actually get all the way up to the top, do another render here, but I'm going to really turn down that reduction so it's not as harsh, and render that way. We see...
I dance to the left, I dance to the right, and down the center too. I have had dogs and cats.
That's a lot cleaner of a reduction. It's important to remember that any of these modules can work with any of these windows. So if something's not working in a full frequency spectrum, really start to dig in and get specific about where that module needs to do fixing. One last thing I want to tackle. We have this sort of low tone here. So you might be able to hear it on your headphones.
I dance to the left.
You can definitely hear it if I drag a frequency selection.
I dance to the left, I dance to the right.
And just to show you, if we really want to find where that frequency is, well, we can hover and again look over at where our cursor is down in the corner. It's telling us that's 130. We can also open up in our measurements spectrum, and I can make a frequency limited selection. I can make a time selection, and we'll see bumps in the spectrum. This isn't too harsh, but I'm going to grab it. I'm going to come to spectral repair, make sure the interpolation is vertical. I want it before where it's quieter and we're not running into the voice. And I'm going to make that 1.8 since I'm fairly certain that's what we want to adjust, and render that away. That's great. We also saw that we cut out a little bit of his voice there, so we actually don't want to do that because we do want that richness out of Pierre's voice. So I'm going to make a time frequency selection and just grab that, render vertical, and there we go.
To the right, and down the center too. I have had dogs and cats.
So we've made some significant fixes to this piece of audio. I'm going to close out our modules, and now I'm going to send this back to Pro Tools. Now we see in our Audio Suite plugin, we have this message, press render to commit changes. If I hit render, we've made some changes. And
Get along most of the time. Like a beautiful rain.
oh, let me unmute
And
that.
now back to the program with Pierre.
And we can hear some of the differences there. And we also see that this has been renamed RX7 Connect, so we know that this has been adjusted with RX. Great, so that's our first pass. That took an hour. Wow, I did not expect us to spend an hour talking about one clip. If anyone has any questions, throw them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to move to our next clip, and we're going to really dig into some of the more specific repair functions when you have some real problems. So I'm going to start, of course, by dragging my clip down to my working track and make sure that we're muted on our original track. And we're just going to listen to this.
Capitulate to those that want to undercut what's all good in America.
So that's a recording of President Ford, and we can hear a lot of cameras snapping while he's talking. This is an example from a show that I did, and one of the things the director asked for was to clean up this archival audio, so we heard more of his voice and less of the cameras. So let's see what we can do about that. Make sure our whole clip is selected. We're going to hit send, and we're going to come over to iZotope RX. Well, this certainly looks a lot different than the last clip we worked on. First thing you'll notice is that there is no frequency information above, what is that? That's 16.5, 16K. And that is because this is an old archival recording, and they were not capturing that information because no one was reproducing it. The other thing we see is that we've got a really distinct noise floor across this whole file. So first things first, I'm just going to go back to the beginning, and we're going to listen to it.
Capitulate to those that want to undercut what's all good in America.
Well, first thing I want to do is I'm just going to gain this clip up a little bit. We're hanging out around minus 18, but I'm going to gain it up a little bit so we can have some better options. Two ways to do this. I can gain and I can render to a higher gain, or the way I prefer to do it, open up my clip gain line. I can click here, or Command G will toggle that. If I just hover over our clip gain and I hold shift, we get this nice little adjustment bar, and I can move the whole thing up and down. So what do we want to do? Let's bring it up a couple dB and let's listen to that.
Undercut what's all good in America. Undercut
So now we're hitting around
all
minus
good
12
in
as
America.
opposed to minus 18. So it's a little bit more comfortable area to work at. I want to get rid of my clip gain line because I don't want to look at it anymore, so I'm going to hit Command G. So, order of operations. There's a couple ways we can go about fixing this. I think the first thing we're going to want to do here is attack our noise. So let's try and find a nice area where we can have spectral denoise learn.
Capitulate to those that want to.
This is a good selection here. Let's see if we can get enough of a clean window for spectral denoise to work. I'm going to turn off adaptive mode. I'm going to hit learn. And hey, there we go. That looks like a pretty clean line. So let's highlight our whole thing. We're just going to leave our threshold and reduction from where we were last time and hit preview. Oh, let's turn off output
Want
noise
to
only.
undercut what's all good in America. Capitulate to those that want to
Wow, that did a really good job. So let's render that out. And we see that we've really reduced our noise there. So before we saw it was pretty smeary. And then if we redo that, we see that our clicks and pops are a lot more distinct. One other way, so that's spectral denoise. Spectral denoise is a great plugin. I want to just real quick show you some other options for how we could have accomplished that using the modules that are here in iZotope. So I'm going to undo that. Oh, and one thing I haven't necessarily talked about, over here we've got, in the bottom right corner, we've got this little history window. And it tells you all of the adjustments that you've made, and you can click between them, so you can go back and forth. I can go back to its initial state. I can jump all the way to where we did spectral denoise. I can go to where we just adjusted our clip gain. You can't go out of order. It's stacking operations. And when we saw our module chain earlier that came up with Repair Assistant, you can manually stack these operations if you have a chain of things you want to affect as well. But the history is nice because you can go back to a point where you did something you liked, maybe build a preset off of that, step forward again, and then reuse that preset somewhere else if you find that you really like it. But great. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to grab this Dialog Isolate plugin. This is iZotope RX Advanced only module, so we're not going to spend too much time on it, but it's important to know that the advanced version of RX has a couple of these more specific modules which are really focused around dialogue or music. A lot of dialogue editors use this program, so there are a lot of dialogue focused features here. I'm going to default that. We're going to preview it.
capitulate to those that want to undercut what's all good in America. Capitulate to those that want to.
All right, so we're going to stop that. Let's render it down. And wow, we see that we got a really distinct reduction in everything that wasn't dialogue. Dialogue Isolate is great if you know that you're just trying to pull dialogue out of a piece of audio and you really don't want anything else there. We see we've got dialogue gain, we've got noise gain, and this dialogue separation sensitivity and ambience preservation. These should all be fairly self-explanatory. If you saw, the first thing I did was pull up a little bit of noise gain. Full noise reduction, I always find, ends up being a little bit weird in a track where you know there is noise. Some of that noise is going to be married to the dialogue, and it's going to be really hard to get rid of, even with really good noise reduction. So leaving a little bit of the noise in between helps to even that out, and you don't get that sound that I hear an unfortunate amount on a lot of shows on a specific streaming service that may or may not start with the letter N, where you hear a really clean noise floor and then someone talks and suddenly noise jumps up while they're talking and then drops back down. the impulse is great, but the end result ends up being really unnatural. So again, if I'm going to use something like dialogue isolate or spectral denoise, I like to find that happy balance where you've made an improvement, but you're not totally slamming your audio. Dialogue isolate's great, but it made our job a little bit easy for us. So we're going to undo that. And we're just going to use the spectral denoise that we did before to do a little bit of denoising. One thing I do want to point out is that I'm really taking the time here to show you the different steps, and something like dialogue isolate, which is one of their more AI-focused tools, is basically doing the steps I'm showing you in the background. It's using the denoise, and it's using the declick and crackle, and it's also able to learn what a voice sounds like. So if you understand really what these modules are doing, it's going to help you a lot to get a cleaner, more polished product, because you can make better decisions about how to use the tool. So we've done spectral denoise, and now we had a lot of those camera sounds were sort of clips or crackles, so let's try our declick module. Set it to default, and let's just hear let's do multiband random. We have a couple options here: single band, multiband periodic, multiband random, low latency. Low latency is a great mode if you're using this as an insert in a DAW, which I, again, don't recommend for a lot of these kinds of plugins. I really think it's better to use a destructive process either in RX standalone or as an audio suite, because it's going to give you a better result. Single band would be like a little static pop or something that's electronic maybe. Multiband periodic, again, will be something that's across the frequency spectrum, but more regular. Multiband random is what we want here because we've got a bunch of random clicks. Frequency skew, we can skew low frequency or high frequency. This was a little bit more high frequency, so I'm going to skew it that way. These clicks are a little bit wider. Let's actually find out how wide one of these clicks is. So let's play that. So if we look down here, our selection length, about a millisecond. So I'm gonna do that. Let's do about a millisecond. Open that up, and we're gonna hit preview.
Capitulate to those that want to.
So that really wasn't as effective as we wanted it, and that's because these aren't really clicks. We saw we had 18 clicks repaired, but when we output our clicks only, we weren't getting these big transients. So we're going to approach these a different way with our favorite spectral repair tool. But one of the important things to note is that just because a module says declick, and the sound you have sounds like a click, doesn't necessarily mean that that's what this is talking about. This module is really going after short, tiny transients and not these sort of longer, distinct sounds. So we're going to get rid of that. We're going to bring up our favorite spectral repair module. Well, let's just push it over into the corner so it's not blocking anything. And we're going to start going after some of these clicks. I'm pretty sure that I want horizontal, I want before waiting, and we're going to leave some of these other options where they are, but let's bring the strength all the way up to 2. Let's tackle this big one right here. And I'm just going to grab my time frequency selection tool, render that down, and there we go.
Want to undercut.
And grab our time frequency selection. And grab this one too. Though we heard there's a little bit of, and we can see as well, that there's a little bit of the sort of wind up of the camera right there. So I'm actually going to widen this a little bit. And again, you can grab any part of a selection there and just use that little handle to adjust it. I'm going to bring this in a little bit, and I'm actually going to change the before after waiting to after, and let's see if that does what we want it to. Let's render there. That didn't work so well. Let's undo, bring it forward. So I was wrong. We actually did want to do that. And we got rid of this pre-click, but we still hear some of the main click there. So let's do another process on that.
Undercut.
And there we go. It's gone. It is totally valid to do layers of attenuation on a sound and get the different parts of it. That way you can get the tail in one go and then the transient in the next go. And instead of, highlighting it all, setting your strength to the level you need to get rid of the transient, and then just leaving a big empty area where a tail was, you can really even out that work. One other thing I want to talk about here, now that we've got a pretty good spectral repair setting, I've got a lot of these clicks, and I don't want to come over here and hit render every single time. So I'm going to come over, and I'm going to click this button called Instant Process. What Instant Process does is, if I make a selection, so I'm just going to play something here, and I know that this is a click I want to get rid of, since I've made that selection, it's just automatically going to do the attenuation that I want on this area. If you've got a repeating sound like one of these camera clicks, it's a really, really handy way to move quicker once you've figured out what the settings you like are. And again, I have the strength set to 2, but say what I really want is a strength of 4, I can instead do Instant Process just twice over the same area, and it's going to take it down.
Capitulate to the...
Ooh, that really got rid of it. And that was because there's no audio over here. And that's why that went 0. So if I actually set my weighting to after, and I render that, it's a little bit cleaner. We still hear a little bit of a click.
Capitulate.
But I think you all get the idea. Instant Process is great. It works in all of the modes. It works in frequency selection. It works in time selection. And it works with the brush tool. Do be cognizant of when you've put this on, otherwise you'll just start attenuating things without realizing it. Instant Process works with the Attenuate module and Spectral Repair, by far the most common module that I grabbed for. It also works with Declick, Fade, Gain, and the Replace module in Spectral Repair, which we will get to a little bit later. So one thing I do want to tackle here is what happens when we have a click that's embedded in a voice.
Those that want to,
Or let's listen to this one.
capitulate.
Yeah, let's do
Those that want
to right here. Well, I'm going to turn off my Instant Process so I can make the selection, and then I can zoom in on it.
Those that want to.
So we see here, this vertical line right there is clearly what we're looking for. So we want to get that selection. Let's start with just our time frequency selection. That's a little bit annoying, but one little trick I want to show you here is that you can adjust this window while you're playing, which is really handy for finding where the low and high end of a frequency band you're trying to eliminate is in a sound. So we're going to open this up so we're clearly inside the voice, which we can see it's got those nice horizontal lines. And I'm in the wrong play mode. I want to be in play frequency selection. So we're hearing that around here is really the difference between the voice and that click. So it's, even though there might be some click buried in the voice here, we're going to have a lot more success if we get rid of the clicky part that is separate from the voice first and treat them as two separate processes. I can use my window that I've made to just do render. That render is going to want to be before weighted. Let's turn down the bands. That's a little extreme, and render that way. And there we go. Let's take a listen.
those that want to,
That was pretty good. We heard a little bit of messiness here, and that was some artifacts left over from this operation.
those that want,
There's a couple ways we can fix that. One, I can turn down the strength of this, make it 1.2 instead of 2.0. Play it.
those that want,
That's a little bit better, but we also have a pretty wide selection window here. So if we switch to our brush tool and instead brush out this sound right there, we're going to try and be really discreet about that. Listen to our little frequency selection. It's always tough when you're trying to do these tight little clicks, because it's so hard to tell when you do these really specific bands if you've got the frequency selection right. I'm going to weight this before. I'm going to put the strength at 1.0, and I'm going to render it. Now let's take a listen.
those that want to,
And now we hear we got a much cleaner reduction. And this was another click over here that we didn't get to, but that's going to be pretty easy to get rid of, so let's just render that away.
those that want to, those that want to,
There's still a little bit of click that's buried in the voice here. And we can actually see that down there where this vertical line is interrupting. And again, let's just take that down. This is a pretty small brush. Let me fix that. If I click and hold on the brush tool, I get this little brush size pixel thing. I'll bring that up to like 35. And let's just make a selection here. Get all that in the middle. Let's render that down.
those that want to,
So we're getting closer. I could tackle this a lot more, but for the sake of this stream, I just want to give you an idea of how that tool works. Really getting good with the spectral repair tool and making these specific brush and time frequency domain selections is going to make your life way, way easier. And that's really where RX is going to become the most powerful. Sorry, I've got a couple notes over to the side, and I just wanted to check if there's anything else I wanted to talk about in this file specifically. Let's just listen to it one more time.
capitulate to those that want to undercut what's all good in America.
So again, we've got all of these. We can tackle these separately. We can use our dialogue isolate as we looked at before, which is going to do a good job of really taking down a lot of those clicks.
Capitulate to those that want to undercut what's all good in America.
What's great about this file is it's a little low file already, so you can get away with a lot more work than you're able to on something that was recorded much more recently, or is going out for a much cleaner distribution and isn't necessarily archival audio. But we're going to take our file, we're going to send it back to Pro Tools, we're going to render it again, and then, wow, you can even see right there. Oh, let me bring us over to the right area. You can even see the differences between the noise in here. That's totally gone in our rendered file. And again, let's just do a quick before and after.
Capitulate to those that want to undercut what's all good in America.
Great. So that's a lot of the dialogue tools. I've got a lot of other things here that I want to talk about, but it's been a pretty long time already. Let's listen to... well, first of all, does anyone have any questions about what we've talked about so far? Anything anyone wants me to go over again? I'm happy to dig into more detail about any of the tools we just looked at. Otherwise, I'm going to open up another file and just keep going. Take a drink of something real quick. Been doing a lot of talking. All right. So, what do we want to look at next here? All right, let's do a quick vote. Do we want to look at cleaning up noisy field recordings? Do we want to look at the debleed module? I can do that either with vocals or I can do it with music. I've got a kick drum track that has some snare in it. Or do we want to look at some more dialogue cleaning up? Someone throw up a comment. All right, we've got a vote for dialogue cleaning. Let's do some declucking. I have a file here from Jeremy Lee. And we're going to listen to this real quick.
She had been without a heartbeat for 40 plus minutes. And I think that rebellion leads to rebellion. I don't think it matters what your upbringing is. And so it was, I think it's...
So as we hear, we've got a fairly high noise floor in this piece. And also, we've got some chickens clucking in the background. So, let's send this over to RX and see if we can de-chicken this clip. First thing we notice, this is not a very high gain file. Let's play it.
To rebellion. I don't think it matters.
We're sitting
what your upbringing
in the neg 20s. Yeah, Robert, I can look at content creation with RX as a design element after this. So that's a good thing to look at next. But let's take a pass at our noisy chicken man.
Rebellion. I don't think it matters.
So first things first, let's gain this up. Again, Command G to get our gain line, hold Shift, bring it up. It's a little bit brighter.
She had been without a heartbeat for 40 plus minutes. And I think that rebellion...
Great. So that's a little bit more workable. We can hear what we're working with better. We've got a better working level down here in our meter. So first things first, let's get rid of some of this noise. We can use spectral denoise. For this, I want to look at a module called Deconstruct. Deconstruct is another AI module, and it splits the content into three different areas: tonal gain, noisy gain, and transient gain. And what this does, it allows you to rebalance content that has different types of elements. It's a little bit hard to describe, so this is all flat. We're going to put the balance towards tonal pretty hard. We're going to bring down the noise gain, let's say 3, and let's preview it.
She had been without a heartbeat for 40 plus minutes. And I think that rebellion leads to rebellion. I don't think it matters what your upbringing is. And so it was, I think, a surprise to everybody when she woke up 5 or 6 days later and with the same wit and sense of humor that she'd always had. She's a mystery. I think she's a mystery.
So as we heard already, we've really done a good job here of separating out noisy gain and tonal gain. We're going to look at deconstruct a little bit more in a future module, and that's actually not what I'm going to use here. I'm going to go straight for dialogue isolate and see if that does what we want.
She had been without a heartbeat for 40 plus minutes. And I think that rebellion leads to rebellion. I don't think it matters what your upbringing is. And so it was, I think, a surprise to everybody when she had been without a heartbeat for...
Yeah, dialogue isolate's okay. Maybe I was wrong. Let's come back to spectral denoise. See if we can teach this some of our noise. That's okay. It's got a breath in there. see if it'll learn from that. Alright, so it learned a noise profile. Let's preview this.
40 plus minutes. And I think that rebellion leads to rebellion. I don't think it matters.
So that's pretty good. Let's render that down. And wow, that got really clear. But one thing I want to point out is that we've still got a fair amount of noise here in these high frequencies. And when we're talking about noise, the high frequencies is really going to be where that noise floor pokes out the most.
To rebellion.
So I'm going to make a frequency selection tool. All the way up here.
She had been without a heartbeat.
Play the right time. So we've got a fair amount of noise here.
Everybody.
And I'm going to see if we can get a noise profile just at these high frequencies. There. Noise profile not captured at some frequencies. I'm going to tell it no. And then I'm going to grab a frequency selection tool and I'm going to ask it to, we're going to really increase the reduction there. Let's preview this.
She had been without a heartbeat for 40 plus minutes. And I think that rebellion leads to rebellion.
So that was a little extreme, but actually what we see is we got a really clean noise reduction here where there's a lot fewer harmonics, there's a lot less extra stuff going on, and that was able to really reduce our perceptual noise.
And so it was, I think, a surprise.
It's a little weird, so we're going to leave it how it was for now, but know that frequency-dependent spectral denoising is a great tool for cleaning up content, especially when you've got a noise floor that's not interfering with the main part of your content. So we're going to leave it here.
So it was.
We're going to go after some chickens.
About a heartbeat for 40 plus minutes, and
So let's zoom in. Listen to this chicken.
40 plus minutes, and
So I'm pretty sure this is our first chicken. And how are we going to find that? Well, we're going to take our brush tool. And let's do some selections. Not exactly. Let's do a time frequency selection and listen for our chicken. So we've got no chicken here, so let's start to lower it. And we hear right around here is where we start to limit out that chicken. And we don't have any chicken down here. So our first instinct was correct. Listening to a sort of brush frequency selection like that is always a little bit weird. So I like using these windows to find frequencies that I'm looking for and really dive into what I'm seeing in the spectrum, even if this isn't the window that I'm going to use to do my fixing. So I'm going to take my brush and we're going to draw over this one. And let's see if running our harmonics is going to help us out. Chicken harmonics are not quite what we think they are, so the harmonic tool really didn't grab what we were looking for. Oh, let's grab a little bit of this, and let's just try that. You're going to spend a lot of time with something like this, trying things out until you find a solution that really works. I'm going to use vertical interpolation because I want to try and retain some of that voice. And I'm going to leave the strength fairly low. Let's leave it 0.8. And let's do before weighting, so we're pulling from some lower frequencies. Great. That went down. Let's hear if that helped.
40 plus minutes, and
That's fairly significant.
40 plus minutes.
Redo that.
Plus minutes.
So we still hear a little bit of squeaking, so let's see if we can find that. Yeah, so I think it's probably this area right here. Try and paint some of that out. I think it's probably a little bit of that too. And again, I'm gonna use my same settings from before and listen to it.
Plus minutes, and I think that.
So it's not perfect, but that's fairly significant compared to what we were hearing before. Again, we've got our spectral repair option, so I can take the brush, I can instant process. Let's go listen for another chicken.
Plus minutes, and I think that rebellion leads to rebellion.
Yeah, let's just try and paint that out a little bit. See if that helped.
Rebellion leads to rebellion.
And we'll go over that all one more time. I clipped a little bit of that there, but that's fine for right now.
Rebellion leads to rebellion.
Yeah, so we reduced that a bit. When you've got similar frequency content that's married like this, it's always really tricky to get that out. So since we've done a denoising pass, I want to actually come back to dialogue isolate and see if we can isolate out the dialogue versus the chickens anymore, now that this module isn't focusing on the pure noise.
She had been without a heartbeat for 40 plus minutes, and I think that rebellion leads to rebellion. I don't think it matters what your upbringing is, and so it was. I think it's.
There we go. That's a little bit closer. Let's listen to it now that it's rendered.
She had been without a heartbeat for 40 plus minutes, and I think that rebellion leads to rebellion.
So, that's not too bad. Again, a file like this where you really see something married like a chicken cluck that's in the same frequency range and the voice is going to be really tough. But I think I've given you a good overview of how you might approach that. Let's send it back. We'll render it in. And let's do our AB.
She had been without a heartbeat for 40 plus minutes, and I think that rebellion leads to rebellion. I don't think it matters what your upbringing is, and so it was, I think, a surprise to everybody.
So we see our chickens are definitely less present. A lot more time on this clip probably would have given us a better result, but for the purposes of this adventure, let's say, I think we've done a fairly good job. So the next thing I want to look at is, let's get creative, not with fixing issues as much, but let's get creative with creating some new sounds that you really can't get unless you're using something like RX. So again, I'm going to option drag here. I'm going to send this right over to RX, and let's listen to this. So these are some harmonics that I recorded on my acoustic guitar last night, especially for this demo. I made sure that the mic was a little bit further away from my guitar than it normally would be. You can hear a little bit of the hum of my fridge and some other sounds in my apartment in the background, and I made sure to do a little bit more movement than I would if I was really going for a clean recording, so we can hear some of the shuffling and tapping layered in there for us to fix. First thing I would love to do here is let's focus on, I said I wanted to do something and now I've forgotten what it was. First thing I want to do here, let's do a little bit of a denoising pass. So we're going to zoom in on our beginning section over here. Oh, I had instant process on. Let's undo that. Listen. So we've actually got a little bit from an earlier recording pass here, but let's see if we can find somewhere where there's a clean noise profile to work from. we actually don't really have anywhere where there's a clean noise profile. So let's bring up spectral denoise and let's run it in adaptive mode and see what we get. Let's default it real quick. Set our quality up to C. Let's go to musical noise, since that's what we're doing in our artifact gating. And real quick, just because I know that I don't want... well, let's listen to it, and then we'll talk about reduction curves. Oh, I have to turn on adaptive mode. So, this isn't really doing a lot, but what we hear is that when we output noise only, it's actually treating the harmonics as noise. So, I wonder, hold on, let me get a full selection here. I wonder if we can be a little bit creative about this. It's for you, Rob. Let's turn our quality all the way up to best, turn our artifact control all the way over to musical noise. Let's open up these advanced settings as well and take a look at those. We've got some more options for how this denoising algorithm is working. We have smoothing. We have some options for what it's doing to the noise floor, synthesis, enhancement, whitening, and masking. Some dynamics for how we cross this threshold up here and how much reduction we're applying, similar to what you'd see in a compressor. Algorithm, I like to leave it on extreme. So let's leave this output noise only, and let's play around with this and see if we can get some interesting textures that we probably couldn't get in a different way. Oh, have to preview it. Now let's play with this reduction curve. Basically what this does is it gives us a curve on the frequency spectrum for how much it's going to apply this noise reduction. Actually, I want it to do a little bit less. Let's try and leave some of these high frequencies. So that's sort of interesting. Well, let's turn on masking a little bit. Let's render this, see what happens. Now, if you remember, because we were only outputting the noise as opposed to listening to the noise reduced, now we just have this cool layer of harmonics. So that's pretty cool. What if we go further with this? Now we've got this sort of pure harmonic tone. And I wonder what happens if we get rid of some more of these transients here. So I'm going to make, let's use time frequency selection. I'm just going to make a quick little suggestion here. Let's go horizontal after weighting, because we actually want to pull the tail of the tail of the harmonic into the transient. Let's see how that sounds. That was cool, but I think we can go further. Let's turn that strength up to 2.5. So that's pretty cool. We just created a whole different envelope on this. And I'm going to switch to R. I'm going to turn on instant process. And I'm just going to real quick do that to all these other transients. one's not working so well. Let's actually grab our brush tool, and I'm just gonna boop that there. And same thing there. Actually, here's a great example. Instead of doing attenuate, let's use replace. I'm gonna turn off instant process, and I'm gonna replace that with what's after. Surrounding region looks fine. Let's make it multi-resolution. Yeah, there we go. Let's change our instant process to replace so we can do that over here as well. That may not have worked as well as I wanted. There we go. That's pretty cool. Let's grab that one too. So now we're really doing some interesting frequency smearing in a way that you're not gonna get in a DAW. And let's do it. I'm gonna make my brush size a little bit smaller. Same thing there. So that's cool, but it's also a little lo-fi because we did cut out a lot of the frequency content when we inverted our spectral denoise selection. So let's make this feel a little bit bigger. And the way I want to do that is by using a plugin. Again, you can put any plugin into a module chain, and that means that I can come and I can grab, let's say, a reverb here. Let's grab something nice and effecty. What does Appalachian Trail sound like? Nah, let's do Scary Cellar. Scary Cellar sounds like what we want. Let's turn the reverb time way up and preview. What's this using? Let's actually put that on a plate. Nah, I don't love the Scary Cellar. Hold on, let me grab a preset that I know I like. Great. So open this up, we're gonna render this whole thing. That's not super interesting. So what happens if we just put that reverb on some of our higher frequencies? Nope. Forgot the instant process. Don't want to forget the instant process. Let's redo this. Great. So we're just going to put it in here. Open our plugin. Let's make that full wet and let's render it. See what happens. Let's try this. Now we've got some real smearing here. So this is a sort of interesting texture that we wouldn't have necessarily gotten to if we were just using some standard plugins on a DAW. Let's listen to one of these frequencies here. This So I've sort of got this note here. And let's grab a different plugin. Let's do Echo Boy Jr. Let's see what this sounds like. And we just did that on one of the notes that guitar was playing. So let's see how that sounds in the hall. We've almost created another voice inside of this guitar pad just by affecting that one set of notes from the guitar with this plugin. Let's do the same thing down on this low note. And see how we feel. That wasn't super exciting. Let's turn down the mix on that one and see if that's any better. It's got a little bit more of a shimmer. But so that's a pretty interesting sound. But again, it still doesn't sound complete. So here's a really simple technique to make that better. We're going to send it back to Pro Tools. We're going to render it. Wow, that waveform is way different. And now we're just going to play it with the original harmonics. So that's a sort of interesting idea, and we've, created a second pad that can play along with that. I still think if I were to use this sound for something, I would go to the original guitar track and do a sort of light repair where I'd take down some of those more transient parts and then do a little bit more to clean up this sort of spectral layer that we made. But Robert, does that answer your question? Oh, haunting, I love it. I just saw your comment. Yeah, it's, the more that you start to think about the ways in which RX functions that a standard DAW doesn't, it's going to give you a lot more creative ideas for how you can work with your audio and how you can affect sounds, and thinking of it not just as a repair tool, but thinking of it as a creative tool is really going to help to set your work apart and make it feel a little bit more interesting than just layering some plugins on top of a track in a DAW. So we've been going for about 2 hours now. I've got a lot more content to go over, but I feel like we've covered a lot. So I'd love to make sure that if anyone has any questions, we've got a moment to answer it. I'm happy to go back over anything in RX. I'm happy to go back over any of the content we've seen already, and I'm happy to talk about different tools, or whatever. So I'm going to take a drink of water and leave me some comments and let me know what you want to do. Otherwise, I'm happy to end the stream, and if you guys are interested, we can do another one. And if you're not interested, then we don't have to. I know there's 6 of you in here right now. So how is Deep Bleed tool? Yeah, let's take a look at Deep Bleed. Deep Bleed is cool. You want to do that with vocals or music? I should say dialogue or music. Music, great. All right, so let me open up these drum tracks here that my friend Matt Craig very nicely sent to me. Well, I guess we've got one convert. Sonny is into it already. So we've got this drum track, and we're just gonna listen. Let me mute my working tracks here, and we're gonna listen to this as a whole right now. And I said we're gonna listen to it as a whole, and then these are not routed to the right place, so let me route them to the right output. Oh, interesting. I grabbed some other things. But the deep bleed I want to talk about specifically is going to be between the snare and the kick drum. So let me grab my kick in. Let's take a listen to this. Where is it? Let me raise this gain so we can hear it better. And we hear that we've got some snare in there as well. So let's find that snare track. Oh, what I want. Great, so these are our two tracks. Just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to push these next to each other so we've got both of them. So what we want to do is we want to take the snare out of the kick. We're not really hearing the kick and the snare as much, so let's do that. Let's open up Audio Suite. If I can find it, RX7 Connect. I swear I spend more time looking through that Audio Suite drop down to find this plugin than I do anything else. Let's set our handles back to 0, and we're going to send the kick over. And we send it over in repair mode, and that's important to remember because we're going to send our snare drum file over in reference in a second. So let's listen to it in RX. Great. So we hear the snare sort of comes in here. Now, this is an important part. We're going to go back to Pro Tools. And we want to make sure that we've got the same time selection in our reference track as we did in our repair track. So I'm just going to drop my selection down. And I just did that using the Pro Tools key command. P moves up and semicolon moves down. L and apostrophe move left and right. But it's a really handy way to move selections or actually increase or decrease selections if any of you are looking for some quick Pro Tools key clips. But so we're going to highlight the snare, and then instead of sending it over in repair, we're going to send it over in reference. And what this is going to do is it opened the snare up in another window. We hear our snare, and this says ref Pro Tools 1. I can still affect this the same way that I'd affect any other audio file. But it's handy that it says ref coming over from Pro Tools, because now when I come and I grab my deep lead, we see, let's make sure we're defaulted, it says select bleed track. It tells us the active track is Pro Tools 1, which is our kick drum. And if I select ref, and then I hit learn, it's going to capture the relationship between the source and the active track within the current selection. Let's make the selection full, and I'm going to learn it. So it's training debleed. It's going into this other audio file, and it is listening to that content, and then it's comparing it against the spectral content of our main file that we are trying to remove that bleed from. This is super handy in drum sets, in live music recordings, if you have people's vocals in each other. It is really, really handy in dialogue recording if you're catching a little bit of someone else's voice in your voice. And let's preview this. Let's see what it came up with. And of course, my selection is not, was a little bit too wide, so we were waiting until the snare came in. There's a little bit of snare there, so let's turn up our reduction strength. So that's pretty distinct. So we can actually turn this reduction strength all the way up, which you can't normally do. And let's render this out and then take a listen to it. Yeah, some processes like this, which are a lot more AI focused, are going to take a little bit longer to render than some of the other modules. But this is a good example. This is a much longer file than we've been working with. It's about 5 minutes long. So we're running. Y'all having a good day? Y'all enjoying this? Great. Now we see we actually had a huge reduction in a lot of the color between our main transients. So let's just play from over here. So the snare's not totally gone, but it's pretty gone. And if we send this back to Pro Tools, and of course we did the thing that I said not to do, which is we didn't copy the track over. One thing I want to point out right here, if we notice, the track we wanted to re-render is the kick drum track, but our snare is what's selected. So if I hit render, it's going to render my kick drum track that we just had in RX over to that snare track, which is not what we want, so I'm going to undo that. It's really important when you're doing these reference operations to make sure that you don't lose the original frequency, or the original time selection and track selection that you had, because if you render your clip back to the wrong place, you're going to have the wrong clip. Though, something interesting, because I did forget to copy this over, if I move my selection over to my stereo singles, actually, that's not what I want. I want to go to my working stereo, because there are clips over on stereo singles, and I render that out. Oh, no, I wasn't happy about that. Lies. Great, there we go. Apparently that doesn't work. That was a new idea I just had, and I was wrong about it. But so if we play this, and then if we compare to our original file, oh, was that the original? And then, actually, let me just make sure that we've got this in the buffer properly for connect, and I render that out. There we go, that looks more right. Yeah, so that snare is basically gone, as opposed to the original we just had, where we had some snare in the background. Oh, that's not the redo command. It's Shift Command Z in Pro Tools. Great. So that's the dB lead module. Was that helpful? Great. Anything else we want to look at? You mute my drum track and hide those. Oh, I just remembered one thing I wanted to talk about. Let's grab... Oh, I have to turn that on. No, let's grab a different. Yeah, so these are some recordings of what are called number stations. They're a Cold War thing, and also sort of a Cold War holdover. People would find these stations broadcasting on random frequencies all over the world, which were not licensed to any specific operator, and would just broadcast random strings of numbers and letters. The assumption is that they were used for spycraft, but a lot of radio operators got sort of crazy about them and recorded a bunch of them. And they're great tracks to sort of do creative things with. So I've got this one, and I'm actually not going to grab the whole thing. I'm just going to grab, hold on, grab a small selection of it. And we're going to send that over to RX. So again, super noisy content. Super noisy content, super lo-fi. I can run dialogue isolate on this. I'm just gonna run it and see what happens. And it'll fix it a little bit. But I want to show you a sort of cool option that you get, which is the invert selection. One thing we haven't really talked about, we talked about what happens if you delete a selection that's full time, but you can also just delete any selection. So one thing I want to do here is let's open up our, actually let's use this magic wand tool, see how useful that's going to be. Yeah, there we go. We're going to add this to it. Yeah, that was not great. See, that's why I like the brush tool. So we're going to add some brush selection here. And do that. And I'm going to grab one more here just for safety's sake. I saw someone dropped a comment out of the corner of my eye, but I'm going to finish doing this so I don't lose where I am. Do I find running multiple passes of noise reduction sound better? It depends on what the noise is. I am a big fan of running multiple passes in smaller increments and getting more detailed as you can. So actually, oh god, so let me show you this, and then I'm going to show you something cool with noise reduction in this track. So I've got the selection. If I right click, Command I will invert, or Shift Command I will invert selection. So now it's selecting everything except for those sort of nubbins that I did. And if I hit delete, now all I've got is this. So, and that was a sort of quick and dirty, so we don't have all the harmonics we need to really have that voice fully. But if I send this back, and I'm going to move that up here, render it, see, it doesn't do the thing I want it to. Oh, hold on. Let's go back to RX. Oh, nope. Not what I wanted. Send it back into the buffer, render that out. There we go. So now, if I layer these together, I keep forgetting to switch back between my key commands. We've actually pulled that voice out by layering it back into the original track without reducing the noisy quality of the original track, but we've just accentuated that voice that was really buried in there. This is a great technique for super noisy field recordings, if you're trying to pull like birds out, if you're trying to pull animal sounds out, and you don't want to lose the full feel of that. You don't want to lose the full feel of the track, but you want to have some more distinct elements. Doing this kind of creative layering, I find, is really helpful. So let's go back to this original track and talking about running multiple passes of noise reduction. Let's grab our spectral denoise. So there's not a clean place to do a full denoise, but there's basically no harmonic content up here. So again, we can, let's default, let's learn. We've got band limited. Let's see what happens if it actually completes. And actually the first thing we're going to do is let's preview. And we're just gonna, it didn't really do it. Oh, you know why? Because my threshold was a little weird. Noise profile frequency selection was too sparse. That's fine. I'm actually not getting... Oh, that's why. I'm in the wrong quality. So now we see we're really getting all of the high frequency noise and we're letting this harmonic content in. So we're going to do a render there. And that only rendered that frequency area. Let's try a full render and just see what happens. So there we go. That's pretty good. We've got this frequency right here. Let me grab the right thing. And we're just gonna get rid of you, vertical, render. So now let's do a second spectral denoise pass, and we'll do it in adaptive mode. So we'll preview it to teach it a little bit. Great. And now you see that because we've reduced the original noise floor, it's able to really hone in on the noise that's around the harmonic content that we want to keep. And now we've got a much cleaner recording. And that wasn't selected before, so we can actually hear the difference there. But what happens if we just keep running passes of this? I'm just going to run like 3 more passes and see what we get. So it's pretty severe, and we're definitely hearing artifacts, but we just did that really quick, and it's way better than it was before. So now if we go back to that technique that I was talking about earlier when we inverted the frequency selection, we can use this technique as well. We can layer that track on top of the original, and we've really, again, gone a long way at pulling out that voice. Even though there are some artifacts, we've got the original unaffected recording underneath, which will help wash some of those artifacts out. So for lo-fi recordings such as this, where it really doesn't matter if you mangle it a little bit more just by trying to make it clear, this is a great option. Yeah. Do we have any other questions? Oh, one thing I would like to point out, there's some links in the description of this live stream. iZotope has a great learning area. It's like izotope.com/learn or something like that. All of their software is there, but also they've got a lot of great videos and tutorials for really specific techniques using iZotope RX and their other products for mastering, for mixing music, for doing dialogue work, for doing field recording work, for doing creative techniques, which is actually a blog post from there is where I picked up that invert selection technique and the frequency dependent effects plugin technique. So there's a lot of great resources out there, and RX seems like a very complicated tool that is a little scary because it looks so different than a standard DAW, but hopefully one of the things that we've learned here is that it's really not that different. It's just a slightly altered way of looking at sound and thinking about sound. And once you've really wrapped your head around that, it's a really flexible tool that helps to do a lot. You know, there's a little bit of a delay on the chat. But yeah, I'm gonna let's do one last call for questions, comments, and then I think if no one else has anything else, I'm going to end the stream. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions. Or I don't know if anyone's interested in another one of these, or if you want to do one where you send me some problem audio that you've had in the past and we talk about techniques to approach that using RX. It should be recorded. YouTube should be doing it, and as soon as I hit end, it should be compiled into a video that stays on my channel. I was not recording on my end because I didn't want to crash Pro Tools and RX at the same time as I was recording the stream. But maybe for next time I'll try that, because this seemed pretty stable. Yeah, thank you, Sonny and Robert and Will, and I'm not sure who Katuria is, but thank you all for coming. Lance, Matt, Lindsay. I think that's all 8 people that are in this stream. But I had a lot of fun. Oh, hey, Ken. And I hope you all did too. Maybe we do another one of these. I always think it's interesting to see how other people are using tools, so hopefully you all found the way I'm using these tools interesting, and yeah. Alright, cool. So I am going to end the stream. Thank you all very much. I've been Josh Samuels. This has been Tips, Tricks, and Creative Techniques with iZotope RX. And thank you all for coming.